The following podcast is taken from a live broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Book Club show on Inspire 105.1 FM. My name is Imrana Mahmood, and today we are doing a fantastic roundup of books for 2022. I always love doing this because it means I get to pause and reflect on all the amazing books that I've read throughout the year, and hopefully for listeners it will give you an opportunity to add things to your book list for the next year, for the new year. And there might be some books that maybe you've heard a lot about, maybe there was a lot of hype around it, you didn't get around to reading them, or maybe there's some books that you've actually never heard of, and you might actually decide that some of our reviews today are a bit compelling and they'll kind of really get you encouraging to read more. But that's always the best thing about, I guess, approaching the end of year. It kind of feels like feeling something, coming to end of something, and kind of celebrating the year that's gone by. And alhamdulillah, I think, we've all I think just had an opportunity really to hopefully, in terms of post-pandemic, have our priorities, have our values, and really understand them. And definitely I think in the kind of book world, it's definitely given me a lot of I guess an opportunity for escapism, reflection. And I think it's always an amazing way to go on different journeys and adventures. And I'm actually really pleased with myself this year, actually. I think I've done quite well in terms of my reading. There were kind of a little kind of lulls, I think, in some periods where I did struggle to maybe, finish a book or two. So at the moment, I guess on my shelf, I might have some half-read books, but I am definitely intending to read and finish them as soon as I get a chance. But on today's show, I am joined by some wonderful guests who are going to help me to do some kind of book reviews and their own thoughts and reflections on some of the books that they've read. So we have Samia, who is a communications consultant working in the charity sector. She's a keen interest in and commitment to social justice and international development. She's an avid reader and spends her free time reading and reviewing books on her Instagram page, which is Read with Samia, and she supports authors from underrepresented communities. She also recently launched a podcast called The Diverse Bookshelf, where interviews with different authors from marginalised backgrounds. And we also are joined by Hayron, who is a teacher in a local girls' secondary school. She had been homeschooling her sons, and both together they set up an online bookshop called the Sweet Mountain Company. So the first thing I'm going to do is welcome my guests onto the show. So Assalamu alaikum, Samia and Hayron.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's been, I know it's kind of the holidays and there's so much always going on and we're really busy. But I guess my first question would be, maybe Samia, to you, how would you sum up your year in terms of reading and in terms of books? Is it something that you really, is it positive? Is it negative? Is it kind of a mixed bag? I'm interested to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think 2022 was a really good year, like for generally speaking, in terms of the books that came out this year. Like some of our favorite authors, like Elif Shafak, released books at the end of last year or early this year, like new books, which is really exciting. And we had so many good debut authors that released their first novels this year as well. And I read a good amount of books and on the whole had a really good experience. I don't think I read anything that I absolutely hated, but I did read a lot that really kind of like either resonated with me or uplifted me and taught me something.
No, that's wonderful. And I think you're right. There was definitely a really good mix of like well-known authors and then debut authors. And I definitely had a really, I think, like a kind of pleasant experience kind of exploring both. So yeah, I mean, I definitely echo that. Khairon, how about yourself?
For me, alhamdulillah, this year I've been reading quite a lot, which is and a lot of fiction as well this year. So it makes a bit of a change. So I tend to read books that in the backlist, so not necessarily books that are newly published this year. So I tend to read the older books.
and tend to read books that are, that I just come across, so I don't actually look out for them, other than the books that are recommended by the book club. So, but overall, alhamdulillah, it's been a really good reading year, and I've learned so much, um, through the books,
That's that's always good to hear, because this is the book club show, and it would have been a bit strange if all of us had said, actually, this book's been year's been really awful for reading, so that probably wouldn't have been great for our listeners. So, but no, I'm really, really happy to hear that. So I guess what we're going to do today for our listeners is, so all three of us, we're going to share a little bit about some of the books that we've read this year. There will be some that all three of us have read, but there might be others that we haven't all read. So we'll kind of just share our own thoughts and feelings, and maybe opinions on what those are, and maybe on particular authors as well. We're going to start though with a book that we have all read, which is part of the Ramana Book Club. So the Ramana Book Club is a book club which runs every month, and we are, I think, in our 8th year. We just had our 8th anniversary, I think it was in September, and it's a ladies only book club. We meet at the moment once a month at Guruk Chai in Bury Park, and it's a really, really wonderful opportunity for women who love reading, love books, to come together and just have a chat on a particular book that we've kind of chosen. Now, back in September, we read We Are All Birds of Uganda by Hafsa Zayan, and this was a debut book by Hafsa, and we had the pleasure of actually having Hafsa attend an author event in Luton. And so what I will do is just a very quick kind of background, but I'll just read the blurb, and then all three of us will, myself, Sammy and Khair, will kind of share our thoughts on it. So the kind of subtitle is, You Can't Stop Birds from Flying. Excuse me. You can't stop birds from flying, can you? They go where they will. So 1960s Uganda. Hassan is struggling to run his family business following the sudden death of his wife. Just as he begins to see a way forward, a new regime seizes power and a wave of rising prejudice threatens to sweep everything away. Present-day London. Samir, a high-flying lawyer, thought he had it all, but he can't escape an overwhelming feeling of emptiness. When tragedy calls him back home, Samir finds himself caught between a future he's always believed he wanted and a past he struggles to accept, a past he cannot ignore. So that is the blurb. So maybe we can all, because all three of us have read that, what were your initial kind of thoughts on the book? And then how did you feel? Because obviously we attended that author event, and did it give you any particular insights? So I'm going to come to Khairun first. What were your initial thoughts on the book and your general feelings about it?
I was actually very excited to read the book, once it was chosen for the book club, because it's about the expulsion of the South Asian
Yes.
community, I think,
Yes.
from East Africa, from Uganda, in this book. So it's not something that I know about a lot. So I really wanted to read about it. So I had, and I have never heard of Hafsa Zayan. So I was interested to see, something new, and also because I believe she's Muslim lady. So anything from a Muslim author, it's always very intriguing to see what they come up with. So I had very, very, I would say, highish expectations for the book. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I definitely kind of agree with that. I think when it's a person of color, a Muslim author, I think, I already feel a little bit invested. So yeah, no, I think I kind of see what you mean there. Sammy, how about yourself? What were your initial thoughts on reading the book?
Yeah, I mean, much like Heron, actually, I was really excited when I heard initially that the book was coming out back in 2020, because the Asian expulsion from Uganda is really recent history. Like I think it was 1972, which is 50 years ago. So in the grand scheme of things, like that's no time at all. And yet it's something that largely so many of us don't know anything about. It's not something that's taught in school curriculums in the UK. It's not something that like we've seen tons of documentaries about. And I think even those people that were, young or whatever around in the 70s. Even though those people, I think, don't have a huge idea of what actually happened at that time because of reporting issues and, you know, generally the fact that it just wasn't being talked about enough. So I was really excited. And actually, I think we've seen a couple of other books that have come out since then as well. And also because Hafsa, she was winner of the Murky Book Prize, which was, you know, this collaboration between Stormzy and Penguin. So it just felt like a really exciting thing overall. And yes, I was really excited. And I think the book was a really strong debut. You know, like I think, you know, we know that Hafsa was not an author prior to this book. She's a lawyer by profession. And I thought that it was very well done. It was quite an ambitious, she gave herself an ambitious task with it. And, you know, she covered years and multiple characters and perspectives. And yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was such a well-written book, and I think you're right. The fact that it was the winner of the Murky Books, I know, you know, I think quite a few of us were excited to read it for book club. And you know, you're right, because even myself, I mean, I know South Asians who are kind of origin is obviously East Africa, but actually not really ever thinking, okay, what was behind that? So I learned so much, I think, from reading We Are All Birds of Uganda by Hafsa Zayan. And what did you guys think? I mean, this is maybe a slight, just kind of a general thing. I mean, there might be listeners out there who might be interested in joining a book club, or maybe, you know, some of you've got your podcast. You know, sometimes we don't find time to actually leave our homes, or, you know, but so, you know, podcasts have become a great thing. So just maybe a general thought on what are some of the benefits in kind of being part of some sort of, you know, club or group, you know, in terms of reading, the, you know, specifically. Samia, if you, I'll go to you for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think reading can be it is such a personal experience, because you're one person reading, you know, the words that an author has done, and you come to a book with your own ideas, your own prejudices, your own feelings and emotions at the time based on what's going on in your own life, and that really impacts how you relate to it. And so I think one of the best things about being part of a book club is understanding and like hearing from other people how they have related to the book and how they found it and how they read into certain things and how they related to certain characters. It just makes your reading experience so much more rich and exciting and informative. And I think it can really shape the way that you approach your reading in other ways as well. So I think it's absolutely brilliant to be able to interact with other authors, and especially like my book clubs and also like podcasts, when they do sort of invite authors to come. That I think is a phenomenal experience, where you can hear from the person that wrote the book where they were coming from and what they intended and why they chose to do certain things. I think can really help you with your understanding of the book and how you feel about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that it's so kind of crucial, I guess, sometimes, because I mean, I was speaking to somebody recently, and actually I've noticed myself in terms of how many people are contacting me about, you know, information about book club or, you know, the show. So definitely there's kind of a hunger, not just, I guess, for this idea that, you know, people obviously love reading, but the kind of social aspect. But I guess even to that extent, it goes so much deeper, because it really is not just about connecting with a particular book or the characters or the author, but it's obviously the connections with each other and the conversations we're having. And obviously that can become a really, really kind of you know, powerful, really spiritual, you know, space, which is, I think, really, really amazing. Khair, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, with regards to the book club, because you know, normally when you read a book, you normally read it in solitude, you know, and you experience the book, you know, just within yourself, you know, don't normally discuss it with others. So when you have a book club, it's just an opportunity, like Samia says, you know, to hear other people's views about the book, you know, and also challenge. I mean, a lot of the times when we've read books in the book club, you know, what I felt the book was about, and then hear someone else saying something completely different from what I felt. And I thought, that's like a different perspective, and you can, so it's kind of like challenges your views a little bit as well. So that's very, very important, I think. But also the other thing is, what I found with the book club is I'm with the book club, I'm reading books that I would not normally pick up to read myself. So that's a bit of that's really important for me to like just expand my my reading, and otherwise I could just be in a bubble of the kind of books that I like, and so the choices, the different choices in the book club, definitely it's really expanding.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say it's widened my horizons so much because, I'm not reading books that I would normally read. Definitely being part of book club, there's been books I think, oh my God, I'm dreading it. Just maybe I don't find it interesting or the thought of it. But then, you kind of read, you think, oh no, actually it was, it was really good. So I think there's always, kind of a positive thing to that. So maybe what we'll do now, so obviously we've just kind of spoken, about a book that all three of us have read, which is We Are All Birds of Uganda by Hafsa Zayan. So maybe now I kind of just hand over to you in terms of a particular book that you've picked, for today's show that's really kind of stood out to you in 2022. And that could be for any reason. It could be good, bad, or whatever it is. You kind of found it profound or had a huge impact. But yes, so Khairu, shall I come to you first for that? Is there a particular book that you read in this past year that you really just want to kind of share with listeners?
Yeah, I don't know, because it's very difficult to choose. But what I would say is like the books, and because I read a lot of fiction this year, so books where the characters stay with you, that's the kind of books that have stayed with me, so I'm not sure which book, but the most recent one I read, and obviously that's the most recent one that I will remember, is because we read the book, the reading list by can't remember her name, Sarah Nisha, I think.
Yes,
Sarah Nisha Adams. So she had a list of books that was in the book. So I didn't particularly enjoy that book itself, but there was a list of the books that were in the that's mentioned in the reading list. And there were 7 books, and out of all I had only not read 2, which was Beloved and A Suitable Boy.
Right.
I straight away got my copy of Beloved because it's been sitting there for a long time. So it just made me, so I started reading it, and I have to say, Beloved by Toni Morrison is probably my best read this year, I think. It's very difficult to, I've only just finished it 2-3 days ago. But it's a book that I feel is a little bit special. If you don't ask me to explain, but it's really, just from the point of view of the style of writing, the language, it's just beautiful, and there's like. And I don't know if you remember during the book club, I said I started reading Beloved, and I had more affinity with the characters in Beloved than I had with the characters in the reading list. Although we were, that was in London, the characters in the reading list in London, but Beloved was, Midwest, USA. So there's something very, very human, very beautiful about Beloved, and that would be my read. I can't even give you a summary of the book because I don't know.
No, it's fine. I mean, it's good to, no, and I think it's really interesting the fact that obviously we read a book about books, because obviously the reading list, like you said, there's a list of books, and the fact that then it gave you a reminder of you actually want to read Beloved, and actually how that's become one of the standout books for you this year. And I guess that's another thing that books can do. It can kind of signpost you, especially books about books. And obviously we do have a few out there, and they're always quite interesting. So I really appreciate that you shared that, and actually maybe Beloved should be on my reading list. Like I've not read it, so I will probably add that as well. Samia, how about yourself? So if you had to pick a particular book that kind of stood out to you mostly, and just for listeners, I just want to kind of make it clear, because I know sometimes when people do these kind of end of year book reviews, the idea isn't really to pit books against each other. It's very much about our own kind of views and maybe what we had particular thoughts on, but the main thing is that hopefully it gives you ideas of what you might be able to read next. But Sammy, coming to you.
Yeah, I mean, so I was really pleasantly surprised by a lot of books this year, but I think one that really stood out is Head Above Water by Shahad Al-Shamari, which is it's actually a memoir written by a woman who is living in the Middle East. I think she's in Kuwait. And she suffers from MS, from multiple sclerosis. And this is her memoir talking about being a Muslim woman working in the field of academia, and also the diagnosis and progression of her illness. And I haven't actually read many memoirs that are about illness or disability, but Shahad writes like so poetically, and she does actually. She has also written poetry, which I discovered afterwards, and I was just like, oh my goodness, that makes complete sense that she's a poet, because her writing is just so gentle and so intimate and really open. And she writes very openly about the onset of her illness, which kind of happened when she was about 19 years old, almost all of a sudden out of the blue. And I think this is kind of how MS develops for a lot of people. So she said, for basically for decades, I was living in a healthy body, and all of a sudden, my body wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. Like I couldn't stand up as I wanted to do. I couldn't walk as I wanted to do. And she describes it very much like her body shutting down. And also she links it. So her family are actually from they're Palestinian. Her parents are Palestinian, or her mum's Palestinian. And she compares it to her family being exiled from Palestine, and not being able to return, and kind of like being forced out of their home due to conflict and war. She describes her illness in the same way as how she felt she was being exiled from her healthy body and her previous life. And I just found it so incredibly moving, and really insightful, because we also kind of look into like patriarchy and the life in the Middle East and what it's like for women and women trying to find love and those things. So I think definitely one of my most powerful reads this year.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing with memoirs, because the writer authors really bared their soul, haven't they? I guess in some sense to the reader. But yeah, I mean, I've not maybe read so many, but the ones I think I have read, which are that are kind of like that memoir form, are definitely I mean, just so insightful, and you learn a lot. But no, Head Above Water sounds really sounds like a really important and a really good book, because I think you're right, maybe we don't get to read as much about illness and about disability, like you said, and how important I guess books and those platforms become. How about yourself, Halo? Is that a particular book that you've read, or are there other type of memoir books, or what generally are your thoughts on books, on memoirs, etc.?
Actually, Imrana, we actually read Emily Pine's Notes to Self, and that's although it's not quite a memoir, that's her writing about her experiences, her feelings, difficulties. I don't know if you remember, and I love memoirs, autobiographies. So I mean, the particular one, Notes to Self by Emily Pine, which was actually recommended by Hafsa Zayan. We chose that, So
That's
so
true.
yeah, I'm thinking, and I think just to bring back to the book club again, because with that book, Notes to Self, and one thing about memoirs, and when people write very honestly about the experiences, you relate to it, or you want to relate to it. And I think the question that you asked at that during that session, which really has stayed with me, I think it's something about, if what advice you would give, to your young self. Do you remember? I can't remember the quote. It was a
Yes,
it was a beautiful quote from the book. And I don't remember the quote, but it led to that question. And
yes,
I think any book that can let me think like that, reflect. I think it's wonderful and powerful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. I will try to dig out that quote if I can. But in the meantime, we are approaching the end of the first half of the show. So today we are doing a book kind of end of year 2022 book reviews, and I am joined in the studio by Samia and Khairun. And we're going to continue in the second half of the show to share some more thoughts and views about some of our other books that we've read in the past year. So please do join us. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, this is Atif Nawaz. Listen to Inspire FM shows in your time by heading over to inspirefm.org or listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the book club show on Inspire 105.1 FM. My name is Imrana Mahmood and today we are doing a 2022 book review of all the various books that we've read. And in the first half of the show, I was joined by Samia and Khairun, who are still with me. And we spoke a little bit about a book that we all read, which is called We Are All Birds of Uganda by Hafsa Zayan, which we read as part of Dar Amna Book Club. We also then mentioned the reading list and a couple other books as well. There was including Head Above Water. So hopefully what I'm hoping is by the end of today's show that everybody listening in, you'll have a nice list for 2023 that you can kind of add. And what we will do is near the end of the show, we'll talk a little bit about the books we are currently reading and ones that we are planning to read. But yeah, the main thing really is that we have a love of reading. We want to share it with you. And hopefully, I get contacted quite a bit by different people who think, they really don't find time to read, but they really want to get into it. So hopefully maybe some of the conversations we have today, maybe we can share maybe some tips or something that we have to help us in particular keep on track, with our reading and the things that, kind of keep us going with that. But yeah, so just before the show, we talked a little bit to Sami and Khairun about a couple of the books that really stood out for them. I'm going to go with a particular book that I really, really enjoyed this year, which was Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine by Tasneem Abdul Rashid. And so I'm just going to read the blurb to give you a bit of an idea of what the book was about. So last week I turned 29. Along with the usual homemade Victoria sponge, helium balloon and Selfridges gift vouchers, my mum's birthday present to me was the threat that if I'm not engaged by my 30th birthday, she's sending me off to the motherland to find a fresh from the dish husband. So when Zara's mum puts together the most archaic of arranged marriage resources, Zara's soon exhausted by her family's failed attempts to set her up with every vaguely suitable Abdul, Ahmed and Farouk. So she decides to take matters into her own hands by signing up for marriage apps and speed dating. After all, how hard can it be to find a husband? When she meets Hamza, a kind British Egyptian who shares her values, Zara knows he would make a good husband. While she's aware that not all marriages are based on love or lust at first sight, Zara struggles with a lack of spark, particularly when she can't stop thinking of someone else. So that is the blurb for Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine by Tasneem Abdul Rashid. And I think this is probably one of the books that I really enjoyed because it made me laugh on multiple occasions while reading the book. And I think, as we all know, sometimes life can be quite stressful or maybe really busy. Any book that can kind of really, that has that kind of a sense of humor where it's making me laugh and smile, I will always enjoy. And also, I think what it was about this book, again, I think we mentioned it in the first half as well, when there's a book that's written by maybe, someone who's South Asian, someone who's Muslim, I think I kind of gravitate towards that kind of anyway. And I think that this book by Tasneem Abdul Rashid, I found it so relatable. And I know we talk a lot about books and in the publishing industry, in the arts, in the media, about representation. And this is kind of for me what it means, that I'm able to pick up a book, read it, and I can see some of the experiences, you know, that I've gone through reflected back at me. And it's, yeah, and I think that's kind of really, really beautiful thing. So basically, yeah, it's about a girl who's turned 29. Obviously, her mum's like, by 30, you better get married. And we know there's so much conversation all the time, especially in our own communities, the idea that women have some sort of like sell by date. If they're not married by a particular age, it's going to be really, really awful, and there must be something wrong with them. And obviously, I think what this book does, it really kind of subverts that narrative and really makes you reflect on, you know, what are in our communities, I guess, our aspirations for marriage, or what are kind of the pitfalls in terms of trying to find a partner. Because, you know, traditionally we have the arranged marriage route, and that in itself can be it can be really, really positive, but it can also be problematic. There's obviously the more modern way, if that's the right term to use, where we've now got so many different marriage apps where you can kind of just swipe right or whatever it is. I mean, I've been married for a while. I don't really know how the new systems work, but so I think what this book does, Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine, I think it just really does make you think about, in a humorous way, in a light-hearted way, actually some of the issues that we do have, you know, in terms of finding a spouse and finding a partner, and actually really exploring what those relationships mean, whether it's a relationship with our parents or whether those potential relationships with, you know, the person we want to, you know, hopefully spend the rest of our life with. So yeah, I think Tasneem did a really, really amazing job of really delving into those themes and really getting us to reflect, but doing it in a way which was kind of funny, and it was really, really relatable. But yeah, so on that, that's kind of one of my books I really enjoyed this year. Sammy, obviously, I don't know whether I'm not sure whether you've read the book or not, but what are your kind of thoughts on books which are written by, I guess, marginalized, you know, authors who are able to really bring our stories kind of out into the open?
Yeah, so I read Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine, and I thought it was such a welcomed addition to publishing.
Mm-hmm.
Because we see a lot of, I mean, I kind of have the feeling that a lot of books that get promoted by people of color are about some form of trauma or hardship. And, you know, that is a huge part of our history and our identity for sure. And I'm glad that we're finally telling our stories. But what I loved about this book was that it was about love and marriage and finding love and trying to get married. And what I think we're not reflected enough in is actually that something so basic and so essential. And it starts, I think, at a really young age. So I read this book, this collection of short stories, edited by an author called Sarita Domingo, and the book is called Who's Loving You? And in the introduction, Sarita writes so beautifully about the idea that so much of romance literature and films is centered on white people, essentially, that when, as people of color, Black people, South Asian people, when we look at that, we're not able to see who's loving us, and on like a very basic and fundamental level. And, you know, she talks about how actually like that's really difficult for young people, for like teenage girls, for example, because if they're reading, I don't know, Jacqueline Wilson, Judy Blume, or whatever, I don't know what the modern day equivalent is, and they're reading love stories that they can't relate to, that they don't see reflected in their families, it creates such a disconnect. And if it comes down to then us not able to understand kind of who is loving us and how we can fall in love and how we can get married, like that's very essential to who we are. And so yeah, like I think it's so great that, you know, Tasneem has written this book which is unapologetically about finding love and trying to get married, but also really clear about, well, look, this is how we do things. You know, there is this arranged marriage route, and, you know, if we are kind of going to events, we're gonna have somebody, you know, a chaperone, and we have these boundaries in place because of our religion, and, you know, our culture says these things. Like it was really like unapologetic with that, and I loved that because, you know, she just kind of said, well, this is how we do things, this is our life. And I found it, as you did, really funny. Like I laughed a lot, which to be honest, I don't find myself laughing really when reading very often, so that was great. And then there's this huge kind of like plot twist,
Yes.
which I did not see coming.
Yes.
I thought she did it so well, because usually I'm like, oh, you can kind of tell that something's going to go wrong, and you kind of can figure out what it was. But this one, I was completely floored. I was like, what? I was really horrified for the character, like, and I really felt it. Like, oh my goodness, I felt her pain in that moment. And I just thought it was like so well done, and it's nice because it felt like a light read, but also like really relatable and honest. And also, you know, she brought out the real emotions and the struggle as well really well, I thought.
Yeah, no, definitely, kind of 100% agree on everything that you've said, and so yeah, that's definitely, I guess, one that we're kind of recommending. Khairul, how about if we come to you? So obviously I've just shared one of my kind of books that I've really enjoyed this year, which is Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine by Tasneem Abdul Rashid. Is there any other particular book that you'd like to share from kind of 2022 that you want to talk about, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a favorite, it just could be like your general thoughts about it.
Just continuing from when you're talking about the books that represent the minorities, so to speak. One go-to author that I do really like. I like the way she writes. I like the content. Is Leila Abu Leila. And I think we've read one of her books, if I'm not mistaken, but Summons for the book club. But she's an author that I particularly like. I mean, it's she writes beautifully, very elegantly, I would say, and on subjects that you would not normally find in the normal mainstream kind of fiction. So there's an author that I would recommend. I've read a couple of her books this year. Maybe 3 books. Actually, I read 3 of her books this year, which is so she's probably the author I read most this year. So Leila Abu Leila. So I read Elsewhere Home, which is a compilation, the anthology of short stories.
Yes.
And I think I reread Bert Simmons this year, and I read what's the other one? The Kindness of Enemies, which I love, and also Minaret.
Right.
Okay, so all her characters are Muslims, and she shows the flaws and all the positive sides as well. So very refreshing, I think. Because I'm reading. I've read her most of her. I mean, I think apart from one, all her books, and I think she's a good author, and there's so much to learn, and her way of writing is so really good. I don't know. That's an author that I would recommend, and I think in generally it's not. And I know, I'm very careful when I recommend books to people, to young people, really, basically, because of the content. So Leila Abu Leila is an author that I'm really usually not afraid to say, okay, read that book, because it's generally really quite clean, so to speak. Yeah.
Yes.
Because there's authors even should be like I would say a safe author. Another author that I would want to just recommend because she's called Yasmin Rahman, and I think she writes mainly young adult stories. So, and I think we read one book for the book club, not this year but last year. I would recommend her for young adults because it does touch on really sensitive issues that I think she's Bengali in origin, so she writes about really sensitive and in a very like very helpful and very how to say subtle, not quite subtle, but in a way that's not so. It doesn't, how do you say, make it a spectacle. I don't know how would you use that word. It's not like making it voyeuristic or anything like that. So it's a really, I would recommend. But the only thing with her books is there's a lot of swearing, but but otherwise, very good for the young people to read.
Yeah, and no, thank you for. I think you're right. I think sometimes you kind of think, oh, I don't want to recommend a particular book, but the recommended author makes so much sense, and I think you're right with Leila Belela. Definitely, I really do enjoy her writing. I mean, I've read maybe 2-3 of her books. The first one, I think it was Minaret that I ever read. And obviously, like you mentioned, we've then read Bird Summons as part of the club, and that was obviously kind of inspired by the Conference of the Birds. So anybody who's kind of into into kind of traditional poetry will have some sort of kind of sense of the type of book, I guess, or the message that she was, hoping to get through that. And again, it was almost had this fantastical element to it. Bird Summons did, and I know some of us in book club we were kind of had slightly different viewpoints on that, how that felt. But I think overall, yeah, it was, her writing is, and I like the way that you said it's elegant, and I think I definitely agree with that. And actually, Layla, she was in touch recently because she actually has a new book out. And I don't know if it's already published or if it's, I'm not quite sure. Samia might know, but it's called River Spirit. So I think it's out next year. So yeah, so that's definitely one I think I'll kind of have on my list for next year, because like we said, that we enjoy her writing. But no, thank you so much for sharing that, and especially what you said about kind of younger readers. And yeah, sometimes we need to navigate that, because obviously as parents and carers, we're wanting our children to read books, but we also know that there might be some elements of books that might not be suitable or age appropriate. So yeah, it's always really helpful to kind of have a bit of signposting, so Yasmin Rahman, I think you said, so her books particularly might also be quite good. Okay, so that's great. So we just then obviously mentioned Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine by Tasneem Abdul Rashid, and then obviously a couple of books by Layla Abu Lela. Samia, coming to you, how about yourself? Is there a particular book or another book that you'd like to talk about today?
So I read this book called In Case of Emergency by Purna Bell. Now, I was actually really surprised by how much I liked it because I wasn't sure that I was gonna love it, because it's kind of like it's fiction, but it's kind of like, I don't know, like popular fiction. I don't know how you describe it. But so it's a story of kind of like a young woman. I think she's in her late 20s or early 30s, and she's on her lunch break at work, and she falls down into like a cellar or something, and she has a really bad accident, and she wakes up in hospital, and she realizes that the emergency contact is like an ex-boyfriend. Right. And he turns up, and she's just like, oh my goodness, what is my life? Basically, she realizes that like her job isn't going great. She doesn't have good relationships with her family. She's falling out with her friends, and she has this huge awakening. And what kind of develops throughout the book is her sort of like, mending her relationships and getting her life in order. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really honest about the struggles that young women face. There was a story kind of like about the relationship with her and her older sister, and they have 8 years or 6 years between them, and that's something that I really related to, because my older sister, I only have one sister, but my sister is 8 years older than me, and it's something that like growing up I struggled sometimes to grapple with it, because it felt like we were never in the same phase of life up until now. And we're kind of still not really in exactly the same phase of life, but we're the most similar that we've ever been. But obviously, like, I'm 32 actually. And so it's taken years for us to kind of for me to feel like we're like, on the same page, and our relationship has completely changed. So that's something I thought was really nice, because I haven't seen that nearly enough talked about, this kind of like gulf the siblings can have because of age difference. And also I love books that are not centered on romantic relationships, and it was about sisters, and it was about friends, and there was obviously like a love story at the kind of simmering away, but it wasn't the focus of the book. So yeah, I mean, I was really surprised by how much I loved that book. It was just really enjoyable to read. It was quite like really well written, really easy to read. I read it really quickly. But yeah, really, really good.
Yeah, and I think it's what you said about, not all books being centered around, romantic relationships, I think is really interesting, because I think you're right, because we do get so much of that, and it is really refreshing, I think, being able to just read about characters and the different type of relationships. So no, definitely, I think that one sounds really, really interesting. Thank you. So now, just before we go on to maybe sharing a little bit more, a couple more of our books. Are there any particular, I don't want to really call them tips, but as in, if I do always have conversations with people, oh no, I don't really get time to read as much as I want to, or maybe I even have, people say that, oh, I'm not really into reading or books. I'd rather, I don't know, watch something on, online or on YouTube or whatever. And so I guess, what advice could you give to either get somebody into reading, but also then to somehow, maintain that? So Hayden, I'm going to come to you for that one. What do you do for yourself?
For myself, I think you just have to make time to read. So I mean, personally, this is something that happened to me because up till, because I started work in September, having after not worked for like 17, 18 years, so I had like very little time, to read for pleasure. So I was reading, like before that I was reading, like, 6 books per month, 6, 7 books per month. I was down to one per month. In fact, so because I feel that maybe, I was just caught up with a lot of things. So the busyness of everything, yes, so you have to make time. So if you want to read, you have to make time.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But so, is there a particular time of day that is kind of fixed for you, where that, okay, this is definitely set. I've set aside my time. This is my reading time, or is it just whenever you find it? How does that work?
Yeah. So for me, generally, I would read. It depends. Obviously, during the weekdays, it's difficult, but during the weekdays will be in the evenings. So take some time. And it has to be a certain amount of time, like not 10, 15 minutes. I mean, because it's just really difficult to get into a book in 10 minutes, So unless you're reading something non-fiction or something academic, then maybe. But if you're reading fiction, it takes time to actually get immersed in the book. So I would give myself a good hour, it's just to relax, So definitely have to make time. But I think also you should also read books that appeal to you. So so that makes things a lot easier. So if it's something that you want to read,
absolutely.
So that would be like,
that's really helpful. No, thank you. And Sammy, how about yourself? Are there any particular advice, or is there anything particular that you follow that kind of keeps you on track?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many books out there now. I think my advice to anyone really that wants to read more or start reading is to try and find something that you like. So, whether it's like a particular genre that you think that you really like if you like rom-com, or you like fantasy or horror, or if there's an author that you read before or that someone recommends or something. I think that the key is to know what you like and then to read those books. Like, don't force yourself to read something just because everyone else is reading it, or because like you've seen adverts plastered everywhere. Like, focus on what it is that you really like, and just read those kind of books, and then find recommendations that are similar. So what you'll find with like kind of like bloggers and whatnot is that we tend to read a lot of the same kind of books, and obviously like diversity as well. But for example, if you like Layla Abu Layla, you're also likely to be interested in reading like The Mountain Sing, or maybe Pachinko or something, and they're all kind of like similar authors with styles and themes and those kind of things. So yeah, I think that's it. Focus on what you really like.
That is such crucial advice, because actually it's making me think I did that this year, where there was one book that was being hyped up so much, and I went to the extent I even bought it on like hardback. I thought, yes, everyone's. I still not read it, and this was like 6 months ago, and I think I just got caught up in this thing. And then actually, when I got down to thinking, I think actually no, I'm. Maybe it's not a book for me. I mean, of course I will read it because I spent money on it, so I will get around to reading it, and I'm sure it'll be great. But yeah, no, I really like that kind of piece of advice, that you don't necessarily need to get into that whole, but everyone else is reading it. And definitely that's always really good. And especially when you're online shopping, because algorithms, if there's a particular book that you've been searching, let's say is a particular author you like, you then get, the online, whatever it is, kind of pushing similar books. And that might be a good way of actually picking something else that you find enjoyable. So no, that's really, really helpful to know.
Can I say, sorry,
yes,
can I say one more thing about a tip?
Sure.
Another is to surround yourself with books. Okay, so that's what if you have the book there, you are more likely to read it. So it's there, so you can see, even if you have kids, you see you reading, so you should I think you should surround yourself with books, and also it's not necessary to buy books, like first hand, and they can be very expensive, especially newly published books. They can be a little bit out of the budget, but libraries, and you'll be surprised at the type of books. There's such a variety of books in the library that you don't even have to reserve. You can just go and you see it's all it's there. So and just borrow them. 'Cause I think that's
that's a really important
something.
point, actually. I mean, because you're right. I mean, we've got such an amazing resource in terms of libraries, and we're very, very lucky in Luton as well. So yeah, definitely, that's a way to do it, which obviously hopefully will be a bit more accessible as well.
And secondhand bookshops. Sorry, just sorry to interrupt again. And use books, books that in charity shops. So you don't feel guilty even if you don't read them. So and it's so you can it's very accessible.
Yes, definitely. It's always worth, kind of just having a look around. But yeah, so we have, I'm afraid, reached the end of the show. So we've had hopefully a really, I think, an amazing kind of conversation about all the different books, or some of the different books that we've read this year. I think that I definitely now, even just through this conversation with Samia and Hairo, have books that I'm going to add to my list for next year. But the main thing really I would say is it always comes down to intentions. Make intentions, inshallah, to read more, just to carve out some kind of me time for yourself, whether that's first thing in the morning or whether it's the last thing that night that you do. But really, it's such I think for myself, definitely an idea of that kind of self-care and well-being. It really is an opportunity to really just sit with yourself, and but also if you want to do it in a social way and join a book club, make intention to do that, inshallah. But the main thing is that, we kind of continue our love of reading, and inshallah I will be back next year, which obviously isn't too far away, and I'll have more guests and more books that we will discuss. In the meantime, please keep us all in your du'as. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Why not tune in to our live stream at inspirefm.org and follow and subscribe to our social media platforms at Inspire FM Luton.